Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. Today I am joined by Charlotte Gupta from University of South Australia. In this episode, Charlotte discusses her research looking at diet and nutrition around shift workers and how we can basically eat for performance while working shift work. As always, you can contact me at iandunican@sleep4performance.com.au. You can follow us on Facebook at Sleep4Performance, at Sleep4Perform on Twitter. And if you are enjoying the podcast, we'd really appreciate if you could leave a review and a rating on iTunes or any other apps you use. And don't forget, the podcast is available on nearly all platforms now, such as Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, the iTunes podcast app, and many, many, many more podcast apps that are out there, which I keep finding every day, and Sleep4Performance Radio is across them. We hit 10,000 downloads recently. Many thanks for that as well. Really appreciate it. We just got a couple of ads, and then we'll be into the episode.
Exercise and diet are well established in society as two pillars for optimizing our health. However, both are supported by a foundation that is often forgotten, yet even more integral to our health, namely sleep. The Sleep Recovery Specialist course is an innovative online education experience that provides an in-depth knowledge base, important sleep assessment tools, and a wide range of effective strategies for supporting clients to improve their sleep habits and behaviors. Improve your sense of happiness and well-being, daily energy and alertness, recovery from physical training, reduce risk of obesity and diabetes, and reduce your appetite and sweet cravings. Achieve all of this and more. For further information and to enroll online, please visit www.nordicfitnesseducationblog.com.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Mark Bubbs, and I'm excited to announce my new book, Peak, The New Science of Athletic Performance That is Revolutionizing Sports, is available for pre-order right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Chapters Indigo, and local booksellers before its release on May 24th. Peak is a groundbreaking book exploring the fundamentals of high performance, not the fads, the importance of consistency, not extreme effort, and the value of patience, not rapid transformation. Peak explores the leading experts, such as Dr. Ian Dunican, who are influencing the top performers in sports on how to achieve world-class success. What are performance professionals saying about Peak? Dr. Rocco Monto, orthopedic surgeon, Team USA physician, and author of The Fountain, says, Peak is a masterpiece of nutritional science from one of the world's leading authorities of athletic health and performance. It's a fantastic resource that provides a roadmap to reaching true wellness. Kelly Olynyk, forward for the NBA's Miami Heat, says, a must-read for athletes and everyone alike. Peak is an immeasurable tool to becoming the best you can be. And Dr. Fergus Connolly, PhD, performance expert and author of Game Changer and 59 Lessons, says, Peak is one of the most impressive and detailed books on applied sports science ever published, a must-have for any practitioner in performance. Regardless if you're trying to improve your physique, propel your endurance performance, or improve your team's record, Peak is about being an expert in the fundamentals and assumes that while top athletes are born, they can also be made. Pick up your copy of Peak today.
Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. It's a cold, crappy, wintry morning. Wintries? Is that a word? And I have a head cold, so apologies for that. And I am joined today by Charlotte Gupta, who's hopefully going to give me some nutritional advice how to get rid of this head cold. Are you able to do that, Charlotte?
Try my best, but they are hard to get rid of.
This is the never-ending head cold, and it comes for a couple of days, and it's gone, and it goes, and it comes, and I think I'll find a cure, and then just over and over again. So anyway, we'll see how we go. So, Charlotte Gupta, am I pronouncing that right? Because I have a great habit of butchering everybody's name.
I say Gupta, but I respond to Gupta, all of them.
I didn't even hear the difference there. Say that again. Gupta.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where is that name from? I've seen a number of people with that name in sleep research.
It's a very common Indian surname. It's kind of like the Smith, I guess, of India.
Oh, is it? There's another guy as well who's got a paper out about, I think, kind of sleep problems in athletes. Luke Gupta.
Yeah, Gupta. I have come across the name. I think there's another Charlotte Gupta in research as well that annoys me. I feel like we're mortal enemies somehow.
Well, I don't know if there's any more Ian Doonigans out there, but if there is, God help the world. That's all I'd say. So, yeah. So, Charlotte, whereabouts are you today, and where are you stationed in this great wide world?
So I'm in Adelaide at the University of South Australia at the Sleep and Chronobiology Laboratory. So Siobhan Banks's lab, who you had on the podcast a while ago. Yeah,
that's right. We had Siobhan on last year, season 2, I think episode 7. Yeah. So Adelaide, what's the weather like in Adelaide today?
Cold, cloudy, pretty miserable, really.
It's funny, isn't it? Because everybody thinks, oh, you live in Australia, it's like 30 degrees the whole time. And it's like, no, we actually get a fairly chilly winter, and especially you guys down there in the Australian Bay. You know?
Yeah, we do get the hot, but yeah, in winter it's cold.
Yeah, my wife is from Warrnambool, just down the road from Adelaide. So if often me down there in the middle of winter, I'm like, oh, this is great. Australia's awesome. And as the wind and the rain is driving at a 45-degree angle into your face. So no, they don't. This podcast has turned into the Weather Channel very quickly, but anyway, that's okay. So Shirley, you're living in Adelaide, and you're at UniSA doing researching around sleep. But I'm interested to find out about where did you grow up originally in Australia?
I was born in Adelaide and all through high school in Adelaide, and then did psychology at uni here, and didn't really know that sleep research existed when I was in undergrad. Bad to say, didn't know that there was this whole world of sleep laboratories and research and shiftwork research. I was pretty naive to the whole thing. And then in my honours year, stayed UniSA again and was lucky enough to work with Siobhan and realise that this whole world existed and how interesting it was to get to look at things in the sleep laboratory and ask these questions about shift work, and really got me interested in honours and stayed there since then. So it's like 4 years since then, and I'm right at the end of the PhD now, so UniSA the whole time.
Very good. And so you're born, bred and stayed in Adelaide. It's interesting because I never hear about anybody moving to Adelaide, but I only hear about people from Adelaide staying in Adelaide.
Yeah.
Why is that, do you think?
I don't know. I think I do. Most of people that I went to school with, you stay in Adelaide and then you go to uni in Adelaide, and then maybe it's then that you might find a job somewhere else and move away. But most people even then eventually come back here. So it is a nice place. It's cold, but it's a nice place. So maybe.
Adelaide, what's it commonly referred to as the city, the town of churches? Is it the city of churches?
Yeah, we do have a lot of churches. We do call it Radelaide as well. So
Radelaide.
More exciting, yeah.
And so, what was the influence in Adelaide about all the churches? How did that start? Or
I don't know the history of it. I don't even know if we do have more churches than you would expect. There are a lot, but I haven't looked into the history of it. We just all adopted it. We just all take it as the truth. We have the most churches.
It's obviously a very holy city. It's like we'll call it now the Vatican of Australia. How about that?
Yeah, that's I guess probably the Pope and where all her sleep research.
So Shirley, you said about doing your undergrad degree in psychology. Was there any particular reason why you got interested in sleep? Was there a particular lecture? Was there a particular experiment or paper? Because we often find that people in the sleep world, it's kind of a unique path how they get into it, and not everybody follows a traditional route into it. So I'm just interested about what sparked your interest in the area of sleep.
When I was in high school was probably the first I heard about or even thought about sleep being something that is important and is worth knowing about. And we learned about we touched on sleep stages and how sleep's controlled in the brain and all of that sort of thing. And it was interesting. And then in undergrad, we just didn't hear about it at all. And now it's changed, and there are sleep courses that to run runs, and I think they're getting a much more broad education on sleep. But when I was in undergrad, we just didn't hear about it. And so in honours, I wanted a more, hands-on research experience. I wanted to see that they do experiments and that sort of cool side of things that you don't get to do in undergrad. And so I think I was more drawn to the sleep lab because of the lab side of things and getting to run experiments and do that more sort of typical psychology that you hear about. And then, so I was drawn to the lab, and then that's what made me realise that sleep deprivation and shift work and all these things are questions that we can ask, we can answer just in this one lab that we have, and that was something that I could do.
Very good. So what's the overarching goal of your PhD? As you said at the start, you're sort of at the tail end now, yet nearly finished. What was the initial sort of hypothesis, and what were you trying to answer with this research?
So we're looking at broadly eating work. So we found that shift workers eat across a 24-hour day. So we live in this 24-hour society. Shift workers eat across 24 hours, but we don't actually know, or there's no evidence yet to say whether it's good or bad to be eating during the night, particularly for performance. So I've come along and wanted to look at whether we can target meal size and meal timing during the night shift to improve performance and safety, because it's something that shift workers are already doing. So is there a way that we can strategically eat and target eating behaviours to improve performance? Because we know that's one of the huge issues with night shift is the reduced performance and safety. Yeah.
And I suppose, Charlotte, just for our listeners, how would you determine shift work, or how would you give a definition of it?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more common. I think the typical sort of 9 to 5 work is becoming less and less common, but broadly in the literature, shift work is sort of considered outside of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. type of work, and it's mainly night shift, but can also be rotating shifts or really early shifts or really late in the evening shifts. So people in healthcare, accommodation, military, emergency services, driving, on-call workers, there's a whole host of people that either do shift work permanently or maybe one alternate shift a week. But I think from a sleep research perspective, we kind of consider it work that is really disruptive to your circadian rhythm. So the sort of shift system that really messes up your circadian alignment and has those effects on health and performance.
So it's interesting there, Charlotte, you said that shift work is only outside of 8 o'clock to 6 o'clock during the day. For many people listening, they're probably like, well, that's me. Like, I fall into that. And it's kind of interesting because the examples you give there, probably we could further break it down and say, like, you got these people who are doing a permanent shift. We have these people doing a irregular shift, like you say, working outside the normal hours of like 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, might be on call or having to work in the evening, probably like most PhD students. Yeah. And then you have got people then who are on this rotating shift work as well, moving through the different phases, from mornings to afternoons to nights. So the kind of that term shift work is very, I suppose, probably has multiple layers within it. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think when you first hear shift work, you just think of night shift and the sort of images of being awake at 3 a.m. But even starting work at 6 a.m. and finishing in the early afternoon is enough to really disrupt your routines and your circadian system, or finishing at 10 o'clock at night. So, yeah, people might not realise that they are working a shift system, that they could be altering their habits or looking at the literature to try and improve things. Because if they are noticing that they're sleepy or these effects, then it is related to the shift system.
So what is it, Charlotte, about the early morning starts that might be causing people to be fatigued? Because we hear a lot today that, get up early, get out to work, get it done, get up early, go to the gym, get things out of the way, rise and grind, 4 a.m. starts, all this sort of thing. What is it about that's not really good for us?
And for some people it might work if you're more of that morning type person, but for a lot of people it does mean you're shortening your sleep, so you might still be going to sleep at the same time, so 10, 11 at night, but then waking up much earlier. So on those days where you are waking up early, you've shortened your sleep, and then that has repercussions for the rest of your sleep for that week. And it also is messing with, when you're eating, when you're doing your social commitments, family commitments. So even that sort of few hours earlier can mess up your day enough that you notice it for a few days after.
Yeah. So it's very similar to jet lag, as many people probably have seen already. How would you describe those similarities to jet lag, Charlotte, for shift workers and jet lag people? What's the underlying kind of similar mechanism that's going on there?
It is very similar. It's that, so when you're jet lagged, it's that your body clock is still in one place, so in Australia, and your physical body's in America, say. So your clock's still used to Australia time, where it's on a set light dark cycle, and then you've gone somewhere and you have to update it, or it takes a few days for it to adjust to the new light dark cycle. And so it's the same with shift work. If your body's used to the daytime diurnal schedule that we're primed to be doing, you're awake during the day, sleeping at night, and if you suddenly shifted that a few hours, then you've got that sort of few hours of jet lag. So if you wake up 4 hours earlier, it's the same as sort of that jet lag feeling you get if you've come to Adelaide from Perth, for example. Yeah.
Oh, very good. All right. So turning our attention, Charlotte, to your actual PhD research and some of the topics that you investigate, can we start off with your probably, let's say, where most good PhDs start is a good lit review. And, you kind of would have trolled through the literature there for a while, and probably constantly doing it up until the day you submit your PhD. I know I was anyway. You're constantly looking for a paper that's popped up, because it's always like the day before you put in your lit review. It's like, there's one more, we found another one. So I'm interested to see in this area of sort of shift work, chrononutrition, what to eat, when to eat, where, why, and how. What did you find initially? What was the big gaps in the literature? Because I know I certainly thought before I spoke to you that there would have been lots more stuff out there, but obviously not.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think shift work is eat, and that's, everyone reports different types of eating patterns on shift, but it's something that hasn't really been looked at with sleep and with the performance and alertness side of things. So what I wanted to look at first, before we started delving into what we could alter and what different strategies we could look at in the lab, we wanted to know what shift workers are already saying that they do, what different factors influence what they do. So I kind of broke it down into the what, when, where, and why of eating on shift, just to try and get that really broad understanding of what shift workers are already doing. And we looked at different things that influence the size of what they eat. So snacking is more common on night shift than during day shift, for example. We looked at where it's sourced from, because if we're wanting to try and alter what people are eating or what size of the meal, we need to know where they're getting their food from, and also why they're eating, so what motivates people to eat. And it was about finding as many papers as good that covered any of those factors. And I think what we found, what was most interesting to me, was that things have been sort of looked at in isolation, so there wasn't much looking at it holistically and understanding how all of these factors together influence eating patterns, and also just the vast differences between industries, between shift patterns in the same industries, between like hospital wards. There are differences in eating patterns. It's sort of everyone has their own, I guess, individual or team strategies for eating. And the biggest gap that we found was that there's no set guidelines for eating. No one's following set recommendations. No one's been able to say, this is what you should be eating. And that's where we kind of wanted to step in from that literature review and sort of be able to come up with those recommendations.
A few probably general questions before we get into some of those papers that you undertook. A couple of points that constantly come up when I speak to shift workers or I speak to athletes is, well, if I'm awake at nighttime, surely I'm burning extra calories, therefore I need more food. Is that true?
I don't actually know. I haven't heard that It is true. I think the main biological mechanism is that we're not primed to be digesting food, and so the body isn't coping with the food as well, and so wouldn't be metabolizing the food into energy as quickly. So I would think that that's more of a sort of myth than what would actually be happening, and that we don't cope with food at night well.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be asking you questions. Is that true as a scientist? Because as we know, Charlotte, nothing is ever true or false. It's like, it depends. So it's probably, I shouldn't be asking you a true or false. It's not a quiz show. So yeah, but it was a question that comes up a lot, and I probably was just paraphrasing exactly what people ask me there. So yeah. So what was the first study you tackled coming out of your PhD? Out of your lit review of your PhD, sorry.
Yeah, so in my honours was actually the first time that we looked at this eating at night on performance, and we did a pilot study just looking at having a big meal during the night shift compared to not eating at all and performance during the night. And so we didn't know what we'd find. We didn't know if we would see an effect on the food, or if not eating would be better or eating would be better. And what we did find was that there was this huge effect of eating the large meal on performance, and that people were reacting much slower on the reaction time tasks we had to do. They were driving in a driving simulator, and they were a lot more unsafe driving after this large meal. They were crashing more often after this large meal, and it was a really sort of surprising effect to us that the large meal was really bad for performance. And from there, we kind of went, all right, well, this is something that we should be looking at, and this is an area that we could be targeting. And so from there, we did the lit review, and I wanted to look at what shift workers actually do. And snacking came up as this really common behaviour, and shift workers found it easy to find snacks on shift, and were snacking a lot in groups. And we wanted to look at whether this behaviour that shift workers are already doing is that better performance than this large meal that we found was bad. And so we conducted this large study that Siobhan mentioned in her podcast, so an HMRC grant study that went for about 2 years, and I looked at specifically eating a large meal during the night, a snack, or not eating on cognitive performance, so the driving simulator and reaction time and ratings.
So just before we got on the rabbit hole on this one, so you had you said a large meal, a snack, and fasting, basically not having anything. Those three different conditions.
Yeah.
What's classified as a large meal? What's the typical meal you give guys in this or participants in this study?
Yeah, we looked at so it was about 30% of their daily energy intake, so kind of a large lunch meal. So it was a sandwich and some nuts and a muesli bar, or sort of variation on that, a sandwich and some cheese and crackers or something like that.
So typically was that meal somewhere between 800 to 1,000 calories?
Yeah, typically. It was depending on their weight, but yeah, it's about that.
And did you calculate the amount of calories required based upon their basal metabolic rate, or was it basically just like self-reported, I need this as a large meal?
Yeah, so we looked at their individual energy needs based on their basal metabolism, and every meal was a percentage of that. So we had macronutrient controlled, energy controlled meals, but might be different sizes between participants.
Yeah, so I think that's interesting, because some people say they need this massive meal, which is like 3 times what they actually need. So I think it's really good that you control that meal. And what about then the kind of the snacks or the smaller type meals? What did that consist of?
So the snack was only 10% of their daily energy. So if the large meal was a sandwich and nuts and muesli bar, then the snack would just be the nuts and the muesli bar, and they would eat the sandwich at a different time. So we made sure they all ate the same food, with a different distribution of energy per 24 hours.
Okay. And then obviously fasting. People ate nothing all night. Were they allowed to drink any liquids?
They water only, but nothing too exciting.
Nothing too exciting. And across this simulated shift work then as well, Charlotte, did people consume caffeine? Did they have any energy drinks, or was that all controlled for?
Yeah, we controlled all of that. So they had nothing containing caffeine, no drinks or chocolate, and just water and whatever food we were giving them. So not very exciting for them, but good.
And when you talk about measuring their actual performance, how was this measured, or how did you extract this data from them?
So they did 4 night shifts, and I had them do a 40-minute driving simulator task 4 times each night shift. So they weren't very happy with me by the end, but it was a long haul, very monotonous drive for 40 minutes, and that was a sort of a long test of being able to sustain attention across time when you're not doing anything exciting. And they also did some shorter, really basic reaction time tasks, so just responding to a light appearing for 3 minutes, and they did a couple of those so we could look at.
Yeah, it's interesting that they weren't too happy doing it, but in saying that, this is exactly what happens in shift workers. Yeah. You see this with these guys doing long haul, trucking across the country, particularly here in Australia, like Western Australia. I think you can drive up to 17 hours. Every state's got its own different sort of legislative requirements around. I think in Western Australia you can drive 17 hours in a day, and then if you look inside, let's say mining, for example, people could be driving between 30 to 60 minutes on what we call like a waste run. People bringing waste product out to a dump. Or even taxi drivers, driving at night as well. So it's interesting. People kind of got annoyed, but this is exactly what goes on. People do stay awake at night. They are sleep deprived. They are eating food, and they are trying to perform a task. So it kind of goes to show how irritable people become, even in a laboratory. Imagine what they're like in a workplace.
Yeah, because these are people that have never experienced shift work. They're purposely chosen because they are young and healthy and non-shift workers. And so, yeah, it is interesting to see them react to having to do shift work for the first time.
So, Charlotte, you did these measures of performance in terms of reaction time. You did a driving test. You standardized the meals. You had these 4 nights, the tests all across the night. What was better, the large meal, the snack, or fasting?
So across all of the performance tests, the snack was the best performing group, which was surprising to us, but it's exciting that the snack was best.
The snack was best. And what was second best, the large meal or fasting?
Fasting.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there any relationship there between fasting and would say the body mass index or the food habits of the person? Because the reason I ask this, a lot of people are doing fasting now as a way to increase performance during the day, reduce weight, get themselves out of a pre-diabetic state or whatever it might be. Or other people are just kind of going, it's just easy to fast for 12, 13, 14 hours a day and then just consume all my meals in a period. Was there any relationship between the fasting and those people that maybe had a higher BMI or weren't used to it, and that therefore they had an adjustment period to fasting, which people often report in the first week or 2?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think that is what we were finding, is that in these people that we specifically screen for, how strict they are with their diet. We want people that are fairly sort of standard in what they eat and when they eat. And when they come into the lab, we had a lot of people that didn't like the fasting. They thought, I'm awake for all this time, I need to be eating. And they were reporting, we had them do scales of hunger and thoughts of food and desire to eat. And the people that were fasting were hungry and had these huge thoughts of food. That definitely could have been playing a part in their performance. They're sort of distracted by hunger and the wanting to be eating.
Yeah, it's interesting because we did some work at the Australian Institute of Sport, and we worked with combat athletes in a simulated study where athletes were trying to make weight for a fight. So athletes typically have to reduce their body weight leading up to a fight, and we did the same thing where we had them on a low fiber diet or low residue diet, and then water loading and so on. So without going into that study in depth, the athletes during the week, all healthy guys in their mid-20s, the talk of food and their self-reported sort of craziness about food over a study that went for like 7 or 8 days, they're only restricted from food or the foods that they wanted for, I think, 4 days. They were still getting, 2,500 calories a day, so they weren't starving. But
Yeah.
my God, people went into a tailspin after 24 hours. Oh, when I finish this study, I'm going to eat 4 buckets of ice cream. I'm going to do this. I need hot chips. People started to go a bit loopy from being, deprived of their food. Did you find this on yours as well?
Yeah, people just weren't happy with not eating. And we even find that when we present the ideas to other researchers and at conferences, that there's this sort of reluctance to not eat during the night shift. There's this thought that if you're awake for that long and you're not eating, then that's bad for your health and that's going to cause more health problems than it is to eat a large meal. And but what we found was they were better in performance than those that had the large meal, and we didn't find any difference in, we measured subjective, so their ratings of headaches and stomach upset and dizziness, and we didn't find any difference in that either. So not eating was causing this, distracted by thoughts of food and a bit irritated with not eating, but wasn't any subjective problems to health.
Mm. Was there any sort of similar work ever done in environments like military or aviation or NASA with astronauts? Because a lot of people might think that these guys might have it down pat, and then we could just replicate that.
Yeah, not that I've been able to see. So there's been studies on what they eat in aviation and in military and how they perform, but not that study of both of them together. So this is kind of the first group to sort of put those two together and think about how eating does affect performance.
Yeah. With this study as well, Charlotte, with the guys, the participants, I say guys a lot, but I mean it collectively. So it's it's like saying I don't know. So with the guys or the participants in this study, did anybody start like losing weight over those 3 or 4 days with the restrictions on their meals? Was there any did you look at body mass and how that may have been reduced?
Yeah, so we weighed them every day, and with the goal of altering the energy intake slightly if they were putting on or losing weight. We wanted them to stay the same throughout the week, and we didn't have anyone that needed their diet to be altered, so no one lost or gained any dramatic sort of weight from the diet that we put them on.
Yeah, so one of the issues that's really interesting. One of the issues we see in long-term shift workers is that obviously there's this disruption between leptin and ghrelin, these appetite regulators, and people who do a lot of shift work over time tend to gain weight. So I think I read before the average shift worker gains about 5 kilos or 12 pounds in a year. And I've certainly seen that in my work, and some guys even more. The most I saw was a guy gain 25 kilos in a year, which is about 60 odd pounds. Yeah, he was doing mining, fly in, fly out work. And obviously with that weight becomes then a whole host of sleep-related breathing disorders that may occur because the person's obviously, gained that weight. Then there's all the other negative or health impacts that come with it too, like being diabetic and so on. Do you think that maybe your studies may be able to influence the eating behaviours of people to kind of minimise these impacts of sleep disorders and other negative health impacts? Do you see any promise in your work for that?
Yeah, that would definitely be the longer term goal of altering these eating patterns, is the short term performance on shift, but also the long term health of the workers. And I think something important about our study is that they're eating foods that are quite healthy, and we know that shift workers, some definitely eat these sorts of foods, but others are eating really heavy foods that are higher in carb and saturated fats and sugar, and that's definitely eating those things during the night is going to be worse for both your performance and also your longer term health and gaining weight. And we've had Crystal Yates from our lab has looked at glucose metabolism from that large meal or the fasting, and found that that large meal impairs glucose metabolism compared to fasting. So if you're eating that large meal over long term during the night, then you're going to be impacting how your body's coping with that. And then that's sort of the link between obesity and diabetes and the long-term shift work. So hopefully reducing food intake is a way we can help people not to see those effects of putting on weight and those health effects.
Yeah. So Charlotte, you had another, oh God, this cough is back. You had another study there, I think it was titled Subjective Hunger, Gastric Upset and Sleepiness in Response to an Altered Meal Timing During Simulated Shift Work. This title here, is this predominantly what we've been speaking about?
Yeah, so it's the same study, and it's the paper focusing on those subjective reactions from people during the night.
Okay. And then the driving component of that was broken out into a separate paper as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we wanted to look at performance separately to all the subjective ratings. So we've looked at hunger, fullness, desire to eat, and the headache, dizziness ratings that I spoke about, and subjective sleepiness across the night, and also, then their performance separately.
Okay. You were speaking there a moment ago about the different types of foods on night shift or in terms of, healthy. So some people might go, well, I'm snacking on night shift. I start at 6 and I finish at 6 in the morning. So I'll have a sausage roll at 11 o'clock. I'll have a meat pie at 2 o'clock, and then I'll have a couple of apples before I go to bed. So that might be one diet. And we definitely have seen that a lot. And then you might have another diet where somebody's bringing salad, tuna, maybe some rice cakes. They might put in, maybe one pie into that to have at 4 o'clock in the morning when they're really starting to crave those fatty foods.
Yeah.
Did you determine a kind of a grouping of stuff that could be picked out for snacks across the night, like, or even a scale of what's better and what's worse? Or have you got to that stage yet?
So in the lab, we gave them things, like I said, like muesli bars and nuts and cheese and crackers and fruit. And so things that were higher in carb but lower in fats and sugars. And so I guess are more typically on the healthy side of the spectrum. And we wanted to have that really controlled. So as we were just looking at the amount of food and the timing rather than the type of food. And then the next step, obviously, is to look at different types of food and things that are higher in fats and sugars. So things like chocolate, or like you were saying, like rolls, or things that are, I guess, on the unhealthier end of the spectrum. And also different timing. So like you said, eating later in the shift or right before you go to bed compared to eating early in the shift. So we had them eat at 12:30 a.m., so quite, I guess, early on in the shift, and we saw the performance effects went across the shift right until sort of 7:30 in the morning. But we don't know what would happen if you would sort of eat another snack later on in the shift. So we've really focused on one really simple eating strategy as the first step, but now that we know that it is this really exciting area to explore, then definitely taking into account those other eating patterns, it's important.
And do you think that the type of, we'll say, shift work is going to be a factor in this? So, for example, when people probably think of shift work, a couple of things come to mind, probably nursing, either on 12-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, a lot of time on their feet, dealing with lots of people, got to be, sort of on it the whole time, frontline healthcare providers, really busy, versus somebody driving a truck that can listen to the ABC radio, cruising along, not very probably physically active, but definitely have to be mentally and cognitively engaged. And then you might have somebody else who's working in a kind of a labouring type environment, a lot of lifting, maybe in a warehouse, moving around, or somebody in a mining operation working overnight who's, working on a blast crew. Do you think those type of outputs will vary the nutrition requirements?
I think the energy expended is likely to have an impact. So in the lab, it's a very controlled environment. We don't let them really do any exercise other than walking to and from rooms. So we deliberately control that. But definitely those jobs where you're more active might play a part in different snacks. I think in terms of the tasks that they're doing, if we would sort of break that down into the type of attention or type of cognitive processes that people are doing. And so we deliberately wanted to have them do a really long, sort of boring, monotonous task, as well as those sort of smaller tasks. So the driving people or people that are monitoring systems are likely to be sitting there sustaining their attention for a while, whereas nurses might be up and reacting to alarms and things quite quickly.
Yeah.
And we found that the food did have an impact across all of those different tasks, and especially in a row, we found that they were reacting worse across time. So after driving, they were reacting worse to the reaction time tasks. And so we think that it's likely to extend to the whole range of different tasks that people are doing. And whether it's for quick tasks or the long, slow, more monotonous tasks. Yeah.
And what about the recovery sleep? Obviously, these guys were in a simulated shift work environment, and we see predominantly in shift work that the sleep is quite variable compared to the 7 to 9 hours. So, people doing night shift probably get between 5 and 6 hours sleep. Those doing evening shift, probably around 6.5 hours sleep, and those on day shift probably somewhere between 7 and 7.5. Was there any relationship between the amount of sleep that they got and any of your factors as well, your outcome factors or your outcomes? Sorry,
they all had a 7-hour day sleep after each night shift.
7 hours.
7 hours.
Wow, that was a good group.
And we didn't see any differences between the eating groups. So eating a large meal during the night or fasting didn't impact the sleep quality or quantity. But the big difference obviously is that it's a lovely sleep lab, which is temperature controlled and noise controlled and dark. And in the real world, people are going back to their houses and there's light and there's noise and there's kids. And so, sleep is going to be a big factor to consider. We don't know if people are sleep restricted, if they will respond differently to the food, and their ratings of hunger and, like you said, leptin and ghrelin has been shown to be impacted by sleep restriction. So whether we're seeing differences in performance when people are sleep restricted would be really interesting to look at.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point there, Charlotte, about people going home and sort of being exposed to light, either commuting home, maybe coming home, the kids are heading out the door, the shift workers going to bed, or if the shift workers, going out the door in the evening, do they have a chance to prepare their food for going on shift, or do they just go past the service station and pick up whatever's on offer? Or is there a canteen at work or a place that provides these healthy options as well? So it's interesting that you're sort of touching on all these things that go into the practical world of shift work that needs to be considered as well, about planning and recovery and so on, because it's a spider web. Once you get into it.
And I think it comes back to the individual strategies, but also workplaces like providing a fruit bowl in the office or the healthier snacks in vending machines. So it sort of has implications for the individual level and also the workplace and organizational level. Yeah.
What do you think about these? Obviously, in the media, we've been bombarded with diets, and probably those of us that are a bit older probably have seen 25 billion diets come through in the last 30 years, and we're like, all right, here comes another one. But probably the latest one that we see is probably the ketogenic diet, the low carb, high fat / paleo, these type of low carb, high fat diets, and also then what's the other one then being intermittent fasting, as we spoke about as well. So people, restricting the window of eating during the day. What do you think about those in terms for shift workers, and do they show any promise, or is that something you've looked into or considered?
We haven't looked into, and I don't think anyone has, to my knowledge, into paleo or keto diets specifically for shift workers. I think intermittent fasting is probably the one that's closest to what we're looking at. Intermittent fasting is all about changing the window of eating time, so only eating for maybe a 6 or 8 hour window during the day. And I guess that's what we're trying to do, is alter the eating window to distribute food differently, so you have a snack at night. But the big difference is that intermittent fasting is all about eating during the day when you're awake, and fasting for longer overnight when you've got that sleep period. And obviously night shift workers have reversed that, so it's a kind of reversal of intermittent fasting and having the day be that long period of fasting. So I guess that's kind of what we are looking at, but looking at the different diets like keto and paleo would be the next step in how they interact with the shift work environment.
Yeah. And so in terms of performance with like athletes or, highly trained amateur athletes, have you looked at this, or do you think this would be an area to look at in terms of chrononutrition and use of snacking? Because obviously a lot of athletes move around, they train at different times, they experience jet lag. Then you've got people who do endurance racing where they race for many hours on end. Is this something that maybe next?
Yeah, it's definitely in that same world of chrononutrition. It's all about the timing of when we're doing certain things, and for athletes, the timing of sleep and of wake and when they're exercising can often be or different to, say, the normal sleep-wake cycle that we're used to. And so eating is a big part of that, particularly, I guess, when you're an athlete and you're targeting your eating for strength and for weight and for things like that. The Port Adelaide football team went to China recently for an AFL, Australian Football League game, and I was wanting to find out what they were eating on the plane and when they were eating. It was worrying me that they weren't going to play well because they're my team, because they were going to be eating on the plane. But they won, so they must have been eating right.
Well, look, I'm not going to allow any secrets here, but I've worked with many different athletic groups, and I tell you, as a fan, as a scientist and as a fan, I'm shocked about what some athletes eat. So for those of you listening to this and thinking that all athletes are, eating, grapes and berries and carrots, it's far from that. I think Uber Eats is probably getting more business out of athletes than any other organisation. Yeah. So Charlotte, you're nearly finished your PhD, you were saying at the start. How long to go? What's the status of your work?
My submission date is set for next month, so I am gone a bit crazy at the moment.
Oh, we've caught you right at the best time, yeah.
Yeah, a bit mad, but good. It's exciting.
So submission next month. So what are we now? We just kicked off, and we're July 1st today.
Yeah.
So you got to have it in by August, and obviously then that should be wrapped up within hopefully within 6 months of your submission. You should be all done and dusted, and we'll be calling you doctor and bowing down to you.
Yes, yeah, that's the plan.
That's the plan. I tell you, it doesn't work like that. I can tell you that.
No. What's the point then?
I thought I'd feel different after. I felt a bit smug for a few hours. The next day, people were swearing at me, so I was brought down to earth very quickly. That's one of the best things about working in consulting, applying the science, is people don't really care what the title you have is.
Yeah.
So Charlotte, what's next after this? Where do you see your career heading? Will you stay in Australia? Will you leave sunny Adelaide? Will you go far away and maybe go to Melbourne? What's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's hard to think past next month at the moment, but I'd love to stay in research and stay in this Shiftwork world. I think we've uncovered something really exciting with the chrononutrition and putting it with performance, and it feels like this is sort of the start of really being able to come up with these specific recommendations for eating. So I'd love to stay, continuing that and teasing apart what type of snack and different timing of snack. But really, my aim is to stay in any sort of research that we can use to help shift workers and help their performance at night.
Excellent. So for any shift workers listening to the podcast, Charlotte, what would you say to them in terms of, eating on shift? What would be any kind of one or two pieces of advice you'd give them?
So what we can say from my research is avoiding large meals during the night shift. So sort of heavy, larger meals like the sandwich and snack sort of meals together, and opt for that smaller snack. So whether it's just a muesli bar and fruit or some nuts or cheese and crackers, just one sort of snack during the night shift. And importantly, you don't have to eat less across 24 hours. So you can still have a big dinner meal before you come on shift. You can eat with your family, things like that, but don't eat a huge amount of food on shift. Just opt for that smaller snack.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks very much, Charlotte. So for anybody that would like to follow you on Twitter, Instagram, any other sort of media, do you have any handles? Do you have any contacts? Would you like to share them out with the wider audience?
So Twitter is CC_Gupta, Gupta, and then you can look up Charlotte Gupta and UniSA and it will come up with my email and ResearchGate and all those sorts of fun places.
That page is broken, Charlotte. I looked up this morning and it's saying page not found.
Oh,
did you know that?
Kicked me out already.
You're on ResearchGate, but I had it up there this morning for UniSA, sorry, and it said page not found. So you might want to get them to fix that in the background.
Yeah, they're getting rid of me already.
Excellent. All right, Charlotte, any closing comments you'd like to make to the audience? Are you all happy? Did we get everything out that we needed to get out?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to share the research and for any shift workers. I'm in awe of working shift work. I did it for a little bit, working on these studies, and it really takes it out of you. So
yeah,
shift work.
For sure. I just as a closing story, because I got many stories. Last week I was talking to some guys in oil and gas in remote part of Western Australia, and they were saying how bad it was, working away and having to be in these areas, and it wasn't even an offshore platform. And I was saying, look, I said, no matter how bad I think it is in Australia or when I'm traveling around or work's going on, I always think back to my early days when I was an infantry soldier lying in a drain in Ireland when it was raining on top of me and it was like -2 and I was freezing cold and I was eating dry biscuits and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think everything from then has been a positive. Yeah. So every time I use that as my reference point, I always think that everything is good. So yeah, that's that's how I always look at it, no matter how bad it is.
Yeah, there's always someone awake at 3 a.m. somewhere.
That's right, yeah. All right, Charlotte, I'll let you go. Thank you very much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks once again to Charlotte Gupta from University of South Australia for making herself available. With only a few weeks to go until she submits her PhD, we really appreciate her taking the time out to have a chat to us. Make sure you follow Charlotte on ResearchGate or Twitter. She's got some really interesting work, and I think this is going to be an area to watch for the future. Irregular work hours, irregular training hours, and the relationship with food and nutrition is only going to be a growing area of research. And I think could have a massive impact on shift work and performance in the future. Okay, until next month, sleep well.